Savannah Lockhart, 32, stood frozen as the country club security approached. Her parents and siblings smugly watched from their table, champagne glasses in hand, celebrating her humiliation. "Ma'am, we've been informed you're trespassing," the guard began. Then his radio crackled. After listening, his expression changed completely. He turned to her family and announced, "This woman isn't trespassing. According to our records, Miss Lockhart is the sole owner of Evergreen Hills Country Club." Before I dive into how I ended up owning my family's beloved country club without them knowing, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this story of family betrayal and sweet revenge sounds interesting, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, the moment my family realized they'd tried to throw the owner out of her own establishment is just the beginning of this wild ride. I grew up in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut, where social status meant everything to the Lockhart family. My father, Richard Lockhart, built his wealth through commercial real estate development, while my mother, Eleanor, dedicated her life to climbing the social ladder. My older brother Preston was the golden child, Yale graduate, former quarterback, and now Dad's right-hand man in the business. My younger sister Whitney had mastered the art of being the family princess, leveraging her beauty and charm to secure a marriage to the son of a state senator. And then there was me, Savannah, the middle child, the disappointment, the one who rejected the family's obsession with appearances and chose a career in environmental law instead of joining Lockhart Developments. My decision to represent clients suing corporations for pollution violations was viewed as a direct attack on everything my family stood for. "You're biting the hand that feeds you," my father would say during our increasingly tense family dinners. "These tree huggers you represent are destroying American business." I tried explaining that responsible business practices and environmental protection could coexist, but my words always fell on deaf ears. The final straw came when I took a case against one of my father's close friends, Harold Winthrop, whose chemical plant had been illegally dumping waste into a local river. The evidence was damning, and we won a substantial settlement for the affected community. The night the verdict was announced, I received a call from my mother. "Your father wants you at the house tomorrow night. Family meeting." Her tone was icy, and I knew what was coming. When I arrived at the sprawling colonial home where I grew up, they were all seated in the living room like a tribunal. My father didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've made your choice, Savannah," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You chose strangers over your own blood. You chose to humiliate this family in front of everyone who matters." "Dad, I chose to uphold the law and protect people who were being poisoned," I countered. "Don't interrupt me," he snapped. "The Lockharts have certain expectations, certain traditions, and you've spat on all of them." My mother dabbed at invisible tears with her monogrammed handkerchief. "We've decided that until you come to your senses and apologize to the Winthrops, you are no longer welcome at family functions." Preston wouldn't even look at me, studying his expensive watch instead. Whitney examined her manicure, occasionally glancing up to ensure she was displaying the appropriate level of family solidarity. Furthermore, my father continued, "We're removing you as a beneficiary from the family trust. When you decide family loyalty matters more than your misguided crusade, we can reconsider your position." I looked around the room, hoping for even a flicker of support, but found none. This wasn't just about the lawsuit, this was years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Years of me not fitting into their carefully constructed image of what a Lockhart should be. "I won't apologize for doing what's right," I said, rising from my chair. "And if that means I'm no longer part of this family, so be it." As I walked out, my mother called after me, "Don't be so dramatic, Savannah. You've always had a flair for theatrics." What they didn't know was that their betrayal had awakened something in me. Something calculated and patient. Something they'd never expect from the daughter they'd dismissed as idealistic and impractical. That night, as I drove back to my modest apartment, a far cry from the luxury my siblings enjoyed, thanks to the family purse strings, I made a call to the one person who'd always seen my true worth, my grandfather Walter Lockhart. Unlike his son, Grandpa Walter had built his fortune through hard work and integrity. He'd grown increasingly disgusted with how my father had transformed the Lockhart name into a symbol of excess and entitlement. We'd always been close, and he'd been secretly proud of my environmental work even if he couldn't say so openly. "They've cut me off, Grandpa," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. His sigh was heavy. "I've been expecting this, sweet pea. Your father has lost sight of what matters. Come see me tomorrow. I think it's time we had a talk about your future." Little did my family know Grandpa Walter and I had been planning for this day for years. Their betrayal wasn't just the end of my place in the family, it was the beginning of a revenge that would be served at the perfect temperature, ice cold. Grandpa Walter's estate sat on 20 acres of rolling hills just outside of town, a testament to old money that valued subtlety over ostentation. Unlike my parents' mansion with its Roman columns and marble statues, his colonial farmhouse had stood for over 200 years, updated with modern conveniences, but maintaining its historical integrity. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, I spotted him sitting on the porch, swing a glass of bourbon in hand despite the early hour. At 85, Grandpa Walter remained sharp as a tack, his piercing blue eyes the same ones I'd inherited, missing nothing. "There she is," he smiled, rising with surprising agility. "My favorite crusader for justice." I hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of tobacco and sandalwood. "I didn't know what else to do, Grandpa. They've completely excommunicated me." He guided me to the porch swing, and we sat side by side looking out over the property that had been in our family for generations. "Your father was always more Sinclair than Lockhart," he said, referring to my grandmother's family. "The Sinclairs measured worth in dollars and connections. The Lockharts, the real Lockharts, valued integrity above all." He took a sip of bourbon before continuing. "Did I ever tell you why I named your father Richard?" I shook my head. "After Richard the Lionheart. I had such hopes he'd be brave and just." He chuckled bitterly. "Should have named him after a different king. John, perhaps. The one who taxed his people into poverty to fund his lavish lifestyle." "I don't want to hurt them, Grandpa," I admitted. "I just wanted them to respect my choices." Sometimes sweet pea people only learn respect when they face consequences. He set down his glass and took my hand in his weathered one. "Which brings me to what I've been wanting to discuss with you for some time now." Over the next few hours, Grandpa Walter revealed a plan so audacious it took my breath away. Unbeknownst to my father, Grandpa still controlled significant family assets through a complex network of trusts and holdings. While my father believed he was running the show, Grandpa had maintained final authority over the crown jewels of the Lockhart empire. "Your father thinks he removed you from the family trust," Grandpa explained, "but he only controls the trust he established. The main family trust, the one your great-grandfather established, is still under my control as the trustee." He shuffled to his study, returning with a thick folder of legal documents. 3 years ago, after you won that class action against the oil company, I made some changes. I've been watching you, Savannah. You've got the Lockhart backbone and the Lockhart heart, a rare combination these days." The documents revealed that Grandpa had been quietly restructuring the family's assets. The Evergreen Hills Country Club, the social epicenter of my parents' world, and the place where they'd announced my effective disownment to all their friends, had been placed in a separate trust with me as the sole beneficiary. "They don't know?" I asked, stunned. "Your father hasn't reviewed the actual ownership documents in years," Grandpa smiled mischievously. "He assumes everything is as it was. The club's management reports to a holding company, which reports to another holding company, which eventually leads back to you. It's all perfectly legal, just buried under layers of corporate structure." "But why?" I asked. Why not just leave everything to me in your will, because wills can be contested? This can't. It's already done. He squeezed my hand. Besides, I'm not planning on dying anytime soon. I want to see Richard's face when he realizes his own arrogance has been his undoing. Over the next 6 months, Grandpa Walter tutored me in the intricacies of the family business empire. We met weekly going through ledgers, contracts, and investment portfolios. I learned that while my father had been focused on flashy real estate deals and social climbing, Grandpa had been making strategic investments in sustainable energy, ethical technology companies, and affordable housing developments. The future belongs to those who can adapt, he told me. Your father thinks the old ways will sustain him forever. He's wrong. During those months, my family never reached out, not for my birthday, not for Thanksgiving, not even for Christmas. The message was clear: I was dead to them unless I begged forgiveness and fell in line. Instead, I threw myself into learning everything Grandpa taught me. By day, I continued my environmental law practice, but evenings and weekends were spent preparing for the moment when I would step out from the shadows. Patience, Grandpa counseled whenever I felt the urge to reveal what we knew. The right moment will present itself. And when it does, you'll be ready. That moment came sooner than either of us expected, triggered by a seemingly innocuous event. The annual Lockhart Family Foundation Gala held every spring at the Evergreen Hills Country Club. For 30 years, the gala had been my parents' crown jewel of social events, where the elite of Connecticut gathered to pretend their checkbooks could absolve them of their environmental and social sins. This year's theme was preserving natural heritage, an irony not lost on me given my family's attitude toward my environmental work. When Grandpa showed me the invitation he'd received, we exchanged a look that said everything. I believe he said, with a slow smile, the right moment has arrived. It was time for Savannah Lockhart to return to the fold, not as the disgraced daughter begging for forgiveness, but as the owner of the very ground beneath their privileged feet. If you're still with me on this journey of family betrayal and behind-the-scenes maneuvering, I'm just getting to the juicy part. This wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about standing up for what's right and showing my family that their actions have consequences. Have you ever had to stand your ground against your own family? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we head into the next part of my story where things really start to get interesting. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I immersed myself in preparations more thorough than any legal case I'd ever worked on. This wasn't just about making a dramatic entrance, it was about systematically reclaiming my place and reshaping the Lockhart legacy according to principles my family had long abandoned. First, I needed to understand exactly how the country club operated. Under the guise of conducting an environmental audit for a client, I hired a consultant to evaluate the property. The reports were troubling but not surprising: outdated water systems wasting thousands of gallons daily, excessive chemical use on the golf course, and energy inefficiencies throughout the facilities. The club that my parents boasted was the pinnacle of luxury was actually an environmental disaster. We can fix all of this, I told Grandpa Walter as we reviewed the findings in his study. Not only fix it, but make Evergreen Hills a model of sustainable luxury. And it would drive your father absolutely mad, Grandpa added, with a twinkle in his eye. Nothing bothers Richard more than change he doesn't control. Next came the financial deep dive. I worked with Grandpa's longtime accountant Morris, who had harbored his own reservations about my father's management style for years. Together, we uncovered that my father had been using the country club to funnel money into personal projects, writing off family vacations as business development, and charging personal expenses to the club's accounts. It's not technically illegal, Morris explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, but it's certainly unethical. And it violates the club's charter, which specifically prohibits using club assets for personal benefit. I compiled a comprehensive dossier of these financial irregularities, not out of vindictiveness but as leverage. My goal wasn't to destroy my father, it was to force accountability. The third phase of preparation involved the staff. Through discreet meetings arranged by Grandpa Walter, I connected with Evergreen Hills' long-serving employees, groundskeepers, kitchen staff, and maintenance workers, who had been treated as invisible by my family and their social circle for decades. Manuel, the head groundskeeper who had worked at the club for 27 years, became an unexpected ally. "Your grandfather always treated us with respect," he told me during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from the club. "Your father, not so much. Last year he cut our healthcare benefits while spending $3 million on a new water feature for the front entrance." From Diana, who had managed the club's dining services for 15 years, I learned that my mother had personally fired a server for bringing her the wrong type of sparkling water. The poor girl was putting herself through nursing school, Diana said, her voice tight, with restrained anger. No warning, no second chance. These stories strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore, it was about a systemic abuse of power that had gone unchecked for too long. The final piece of the puzzle involved legal preparation. I reached out to Sonia Patel, a brilliant corporate attorney who had been my mentor in law school and now ran her own boutique firm specializing in corporate governance disputes. "What you're describing is a textbook case of corporate entrenchment," Sonia explained, after I shared the details of my situation. "Your father has been operating as though the club is his personal fiefdom, rather than a separate legal entity with its own governance requirements." Together we prepared the necessary legal documents to formalize my assumption of control board resolutions, management transition plans, and notifications to vendors and partners. Everything was in place, ready to be executed at the perfect moment. "Remember," Sonia cautioned, "the goal is clean, decisive action. No drama, no spectacle, just irrefutable legal authority." I nodded, though we both knew that with my family some drama was inevitable. The night before the gala, Grandpa Walter and I shared a quiet dinner at his home. He'd insisted on cooking himself, a skill he'd learned after my grandmother passed, and served his signature beef bourguignon with a bottle of Bordeaux he'd been saving for a special occasion. "Tomorrow everything changes," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "Are you ready?" I considered the question carefully. Was I ready to face the family that had cast me aside? Was I prepared for the backlash that would inevitably follow? Did I have the strength to stand firm when they tried to undermine me, as they surely would? "I'm ready," I answered, clinking my glass against his. "Not just for confrontation, but for transformation. They've run things their way for too long." Grandpa's eyes misted slightly. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you, Savannah. She always said you were the true Lockhart heir, not because of your name but because of your spirit." That night, as I laid out my outfit for the gala, a tailored emerald green suit rather than the expected evening gown, I reflected on how far I'd come. The hurt of rejection had transformed into something stronger: purpose. My family had taught me an unintended lesson about power, not just how it could corrupt, but how it could be redirected toward justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Sonia. "Documents filed. You're officially on record as owner and chairperson effective 9 a.m. tomorrow. Good luck." I smiled, sending back a simple, "Thank you." Then I silenced my phone and went to bed early. Tomorrow would require all my strength and clarity. The morning of the gala dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of what was to come. I drove to a small hotel near the country club, where I'd booked a room to prepare. As I applied my makeup, subtle but polished, and styled my hair into a sleek chignon, I rehearsed what I would say when the moment came. Not words of anger or accusation, not a litany of grievances or past hurts, but something stronger: the calm, measured words of someone stepping into their rightful place. At precisely 6:30 p.m., I pulled up to the Evergreen Hills Country Club, handed my keys to the valet with a generous tip, and walked toward the entrance. The security team had been briefed earlier that day about the change in ownership, though they'd been instructed to keep it confidential until I gave the signal. Heart pounding but head high, I stepped into the lobby of the club my family thought they owned, ready to reclaim not just a property, but my dignity, my heritage, and my future. The Evergreen Hills Country Club ballroom had been transformed for the gala, dripping with crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements, ironically themed around natural preservation. Environmental advocates with checkbooks, my father called them, people who donated to conservation causes while maintaining lifestyles that consumed resources at obscene rates. I paused at the entrance, scanning the room. My parents held court near the center, my mother resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. My father working the room with practiced charm. Preston stood with a group of business associates, gesturing emphatically about something that undoubtedly cast him in a heroic light. Whitney floated between social clusters, her laugh a pitch-perfect mix of delicacy and warmth that she'd perfected over years of social training. They looked so comfortable in their world of privilege, a world that had never questioned their right to occupy it. Until now. I took a deep breath and stepped into the ballroom. The reaction was immediate but subtle. Raised eyebrows, whispered comments behind hands, quick glances between guests who recognized me as the family pariah. I moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server who gave me a knowing nod. My mother spotted me first. Her practiced smile froze, then morphed into a tight-lipped expression of controlled fury. She nudged my father, whose conversation trailed off mid-sentence as he turned to see what had interrupted his performance. The look on his face was worth every difficult moment of the past year. "Savannah," he said, recovering quickly and pasting on a public smile while his eyes remained cold. "This is a private event." "I'm aware," I replied, matching his tone of forced pleasantness. "Then you understand you're not welcome here." He snapped his fingers discreetly, summoning a member of the security team. "We'll handle this quietly to avoid embarrassing you further." The security guard approached, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Lockhart, please escort my daughter out," my father instructed. "She's not on the guest list." I smiled at the guard. Marco, according to his name badge, one of the staff members I'd met with during my preparations. "It's all right, Marco. There seems to be a misunderstanding." My father's face darkened. "The only misunderstanding is your presence at an event where you weren't invited." By now, Preston and Whitney had joined our little tableau, forming a united front against me. Mother placed a strategic hand on father's arm, both to support him and to restrain him from making a scene. "Richard," she murmured, "not here, let security handle it." Marco spoke into his radio, and moments later, the head of security approached a former police officer named James, whom Grandpa Walter had always spoken highly of. "Is there a problem?" James asked, looking between us. "Yes," my father said tersely. "My daughter needs to be removed from the premises. She's trespassing." James glanced at me, then back at my father. "Sir, there seems to be some confusion. According to our records and the notification we received this morning, Mrs. Ottomant Lockhart is the legal owner of Evergreen Hills Country Club." The silence that followed was absolute, as if everyone in our vicinity had simultaneously stopped breathing. "That's absurd," my father finally sputtered. "I am the owner of this club. Have been for 30 years. Actually," I interjected calmly, "Grandfather Walter has always been the principal owner through the Lockhart Family Trust. As of this morning, that ownership has been formally transferred to me, as per the trust provisions he established 3 years ago." The color drained from my father's face. "That's impossible. Walter wouldn't." What?" Richard came a familiar voice as Grandpa Walter appeared beside me, impeccably dressed in his finest suit. "Wouldn't recognize when someone has betrayed the family values. Wouldn't take steps to protect what matters." My mother recovered first, lowering her voice to a hiss. "This is outrageous." You can't just change ownership without board approval, without consultations. Actually, Eleanor Grandpa Walter cut in. I can and I did. It's all perfectly legal and properly filed. The board has been notified though, as you know, the board serves at the pleasure of the trust. Preston stepped forward, his handsome face contorted with disbelief. This is a joke, right? Some kind of twisted revenge fantasy because you got cut off. No joke, I assured him, just good estate planning. Something you might want to look into given how quickly things can change. Whitney, always the quickest to assess which way the wind was blowing, took a small step back from our parents. Self-preservation had always been her strongest skill. My father's shock was transforming into rage. I'll fight this, I'll have lawyers, you're welcome to try, I interrupted, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. But I suggest you review the trust documents first, specifically the morality clauses that grandfather included regarding misappropriation of club resources for personal use. That stopped him cold. He knew exactly what I was referring to, the vacations, the personal expenses, the financial shell games he'd been playing for years. You wouldn't dare bring that up, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I would prefer not to, I agreed. But make this difficult, and I'll have no choice but to conduct a full audit. For transparency's sake. The threat hung in the air between us. Around us, guests were pretending not to listen while catching every word. Now I continued, raising my voice slightly to address not just my family, but the hovering staff and nearby guests. I believe we have a gala to continue. A celebration of environmental preservation, if I'm not mistaken. A cause very close to my heart. I turned to James. Please ensure that all guests are comfortable and that service continues uninterrupted. This is a night for celebration after all. James nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Yes, Miss Lockhart. As he moved away to direct his team, my father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. This isn't over, he snarled, all pretense of civility gone. No, I agreed, looking pointedly at his hand until he released me. It's just beginning. And father, the next time you put your hands on me like that, I'll have you escorted out of my club. I moved away from my stunned family, making my way toward the stage where the evening's program would soon begin. As planned, Sonia was waiting for me in the wings, a tablet in hand, displaying the presentation we'd prepared. Your family looks like they've seen a ghost, she observed. Not a ghost, I corrected her. Just the consequences of their actions finally catching up with them. The MC announced it was time for the traditional Lockhart family welcome, and confused murmurs spread when I took the stage instead of my father. I stepped up to the microphone, surveying the room filled with the wealthy and powerful people who had snubbed me when my family cut me off, who had treated the staff of this club as servants, rather than people who had talked about environmental causes, while living in ways that actively harmed the planet. Good evening, I began, my voice strong and clear. For those who don't know me, I'm Savannah Lockhart, environmental attorney, and as of today the owner and chairperson of Evergreen Hills Country Club. The room erupted in whispers. I continued undeterred. Tonight marks not just our annual gala but the beginning of a new chapter for this institution. Under my leadership, Evergreen Hills will become a true steward of the environment we claim to cherish. We will implement sustainable practices throughout our operations, reduce our water and energy consumption by 40% within 1 year, and establish a foundation that will fund actual environmental protection, not just talk about it at parties. I looked directly at my parents, who remained frozen in place. Change can be difficult. Some may resist it. But progress cannot be stopped by those who cling to outdated ways of thinking and operating. It's time for Evergreen Hills and the Lockhart family to step into the future. As I concluded my speech to scattered, uncertain applause, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't just revenge. It was restoration of values, of purpose, of legacy. And looking at the faces of my family, I knew they were beginning to understand just how thoroughly the tables had turned. Wow, I can see from your reactions in the comments that many of you have experienced family dynamics that hit close to home with this story. Family betrayal cuts deep, doesn't it? If you're finding value in my journey of standing up to toxic family behavior, please hit that like button to help others find this story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect moment. We're right at the turning point where my family realizes they've lost control of everything they valued most. Subscribe to see how they react when they discover just how thoroughly I've prepared for this moment. The remainder of the gala unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of power-shifting hands. While I continued with the planned program, the auction, the speeches, the awards for environmental philanthropy that now felt less hollow under my new vision, my family huddled in corners, their faces alternating between shock, fury, and frantic calculation. By midnight, most guests had departed, leaving behind empty champagne glasses and whispered gossip that would spread through Connecticut's elite circles by morning. I stood on the terrace overlooking the golf course, breathing in the cool night air, when I heard footsteps behind me. "Quite a show you put on tonight," Preston said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone despite the night's revelations. "Very dramatic, very Savannah." I turned to face my brother, noting how his usual confident posture had slightly deflated. "It wasn't meant to be a show, Preston, just a necessary correction." He leaned against the stone balustrade, loosening his bow tie. "You think this makes you important? You think taking over a country club gives you power? I think it's a start," I replied evenly. "This club is symbolic of everything wrong with how our family operates. The exclusivity, the waste, the belief that rules don't apply to Lockharts." Preston laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You always were sanctimonious. Even as a kid, you appointed yourself the family conscience." "Someone had to be," I countered. "While you were learning how to charm your way out of consequences, I was watching what those consequences cost others." A flash of genuine emotion, something like hurt, crossed his face before he masked it with his practiced smirk. "So what's your endgame here? Humiliate the family, destroy Dad's reputation, turn the club into a hippie commune?" "My endgame is building something better," I said. "Something that honors what the Lockhart name used to stand for before it became about nothing but money and status." Preston studied me for a long moment. "You know, when you took that case against Winthrop, I defended you to Dad. Told him you were just idealistic, that you'd grow out of it. Guess I was wrong." The admission surprised me. "You never said anything." "Would it have mattered? You made your choice." "It wasn't a choice between family and principles, Preston. It never had to be. Dad made it an ultimatum." He pushed away from the balustrade, straightening his jacket. "Well, he's currently with his lawyers looking for ways to challenge the transfer. I wouldn't get too comfortable in your new role." "He won't find any loopholes," I said confidently. "Grandpa and I made sure of that." Preston's eyes narrowed. "How long have you two been planning this?" "Long enough to do it right," I replied, not giving him the satisfaction of details. "But this isn't about planning or scheming. It's about stewardship, something Dad forgot a long time ago." "Stewardship," Preston repeated mockingly. "Listen to yourself. You sound like Grandpa's parrot." "I sound like a Lockhart," I corrected him. "The kind that built things to last, not to exploit." He stared at me for a beat, longer than was comfortable, then shook his head. "You've changed, Savannah." "No," I disagreed. "I've just finally stopped apologizing for who I've always been." As Preston walked away, Whitney emerged from the shadows where she'd apparently been listening. Always the strategic one, waiting to see which way the wind blew before committing. "That went well," she remarked dryly, joining me at the balustrade in a cloud of expensive perfume. "Eavesdropping, Whitney. Some things never change." She shrugged delicately. "Information gathering. A girl has to look out for herself." Unlike Preston, Whitney had always been pragmatic to her core. Where he believed in the family mythology, she saw the Lockhart name as a useful brand to leverage for her own purposes. So she said, examining her manicure in the moonlight, "You own the club now." "That's unexpected, but not unwelcome," I suggested, knowing my sister well enough to sense she was probing for opportunity, rather than expressing family solidarity. Whitney smiled, the real one, not the polished society smile she wore for others. "Let's just say I'm interested in seeing where this goes. Mother and father have been a bit restrictive lately." I couldn't help but laugh. "Whitney Lockhart Pemberton, are you actually considering siding with the family outcast?" "I'm considering all my options," she replied carefully. "Damien and I have been discussing starting our own foundation focusing on arts education. Father thinks it's frivolous." Damien was her state senator's son husband, who had unexpectedly shown actual substance beneath his political pedigree. I'd always suspected Whitney had married better than our parents realized. "The club will be establishing several new charitable initiatives," I said, watching her face, "including arts programs for underserved communities." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, the Whitney equivalent of jumping up and down with excitement. "Is that so? Well, isn't that interesting? It could be a partnership opportunity for someone with the right connections and experience," I suggested. "Someone who knows how to navigate social circles while actually accomplishing something meaningful." "Someone like me, you mean?" Her eyes sparkled with interest. "Potentially," I acknowledged. "If that someone could demonstrate loyalty to the new vision, not the old guard." Whitney sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "You know mother and father will never forgive this betrayal." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I replied. "I'm offering a chance to be part of something better. Your choice, of course." She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." As Whitney drifted back inside, I realized the family was fracturing exactly as Grandpa Walter had predicted. Not cleanly between those who supported me and those who opposed me, but in messy, complicated ways that reflected the underlying tensions that had always existed beneath our picture-perfect family facade. The following days brought the expected backlash. My father filed challenges to the ownership transfer, only to have them quickly dismissed when his lawyers realized how meticulously Grandpa Walter had structured the transaction. My mother launched a social whisper campaign telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable, that Grandpa was being manipulated in his old age, that the family would soon rectify this embarrassing situation. But something unexpected happened alongside the predictable resistance. Staff members at the club began approaching me with ideas they'd been afraid to suggest under my father's management. Members, not all but a significant number, expressed support for the sustainable initiatives I'd announced, having harbored their own concerns about the club's environmental impact. Most surprisingly, some of my parents' oldest friends reached out privately to offer their backing. As one elderly woman who'd known my grandmother put it, "The Lockhart name used to mean something more than just money, dear. Some of us remember that even if Richard has forgotten." 3 weeks after the gala, Grandpa Walter and I sat in his study, reviewing the progress of our transformation plan. The membership had been split, some resigned in protest, others embraced the changes, and a surprising number of applications had come in from people who appreciated our new direction. "Your father called me yesterday," Grandpa said, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "What did he want?" I asked, tensing slightly. "To negotiate. He offered to forgive your transgressions if you'd return control to him while maintaining some ceremonial position." Grandpa's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I told him he should speak directly to the owner." "He hasn't called me," I noted. "He will," Grandpa assured me. "Richard has never been able to accept defeat, only postpone it." True to Grandpa's prediction, my father launched his counteroffensive exactly 1 month after the gala. It began with a letter from his attorneys proposing a reasonable compromise. I would remain the nominal owner while transferring operational control back to him. In exchange, I would be welcomed back into the family fold. I declined without hesitation. Next came the pressure campaign. Longtime vendors suddenly canceled contracts with the club. Regular members reported receiving calls suggesting they cancel their memberships until proper management was restored. Even the local newspaper where my father had connections ran a thinly veiled hit piece questioning whether Evergreen Hills was abandoning tradition for trendy environmentalism. The most blatant attack came when the bank that had held the club's accounts for decades suddenly froze our assets, citing concerns about the change in management. My father's college roommate sat on the bank's board. "This is getting ridiculous," I told Sonia during an emergency meeting in the club's conference room. "They're willing to sabotage the entire institution rather than accept that they've lost control." "It's actually good news," Sonia replied, surprisingly calm. "They're resorting to these tactics because the legal routes are closed to them. They're desperate. Desperate people can cause a lot of damage," I pointed out. "True," she acknowledged. "But desperate people also make mistakes." The mistake came sooner than we expected. My father, believing he had successfully paralyzed the club's operations through the frozen accounts, arranged an impromptu meeting with key board members at his home. His plan, as we later discovered, was to convince them to declare a state of emergency and invoke rarely used bylaws to temporarily reinstate previous management. What he didn't know was that Whitney's husband Damien was among those invited, and Damien, having decided his future was better aligned with my vision than my father's, recorded the entire conversation. He explicitly talked about artificially creating a crisis to force you out, Whitney explained, when she and Damien brought me the recording. He even admitted to calling in favors to pressure vendors and the bank. I looked at my sister with new appreciation. "Why are you helping me?" Whitney shrugged elegantly. "Partly because I think you'll win this fight, and I back winners. Partly because Father has been insufferable for years, and it's satisfying to see him finally face consequences." She paused, then added more softly, "And partly because what you're doing with the club actually matters. It's important." Coming from Whitney, this was equivalent to a dramatic declaration of undying loyalty. The recording proved to be exactly what we needed. Our attorneys presented it to the bank's senior leadership, bypassing my father's friend on the board, along with documentation of my father's past financial improprieties. The frozen accounts were released within hours, accompanied by profuse apologies and the sudden early retirement of the board member who had orchestrated the freeze. But the most unexpected ally emerged in the form of Harold Winthrop, the very man whose company I had successfully sued, triggering my family's rejection. He requested a meeting, arriving at the club on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Time had not been kind to Harold. He looked older, more worn than I remembered from the courtroom. "I owe you an apology, Miss Lockhart," he began once we were seated in my office, formerly my father's office, though I'd replaced the hunting trophies with living plants and local artwork. "For," I asked cautiously, "for taking your lawsuit personally." He stared down at his hands. "Your case forced us to clean up our operation. Cost us a fortune in the short term, but it saved the company in the long run. We've become an industry leader in clean manufacturing now, and our stock has tripled." I was stunned by this admission. "I appreciate that, Mr. Winthrop. But I'm curious why you're telling me this now." "Because your father is going around town saying you destroyed my business out of some misguided idealism. I thought you should know that isn't true." He met my eyes directly. "You did the right thing even when it was difficult. That's rare." The validation from this unexpected source strengthened my resolve. If Harold Winthrop, once my greatest adversary, could recognize the value in what I'd done, perhaps others would too. The tide began to turn more definitively as our sustainable initiatives at the club started showing results. The water conservation systems we installed reduced consumption by 37% in the first quarter. The organic approach to course management eliminated toxic runoff into local waterways. Solar panels installed on the clubhouse roof cut electricity costs significantly. Members who had initially resisted the changes grudgingly admitted that the course played just as well without the chemical treatments, and that the locally sourced menu in the dining room was superior to the previous offerings. The waiting list for membership grew as the club's reputation evolved from stuffy old money enclave to forward-thinking institution. 3 months after the gala, Preston requested a meeting. He arrived, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, the confident gleam in his eye dimmed. "Dad's obsessed with destroying you," he said, without preamble. "It's affecting the business. He's making bad decisions, alienating partners, burning bridges, all because he can't accept that you outsmarted him." "That's unfortunate," I replied, genuinely sorry to hear it. Despite everything, I had never wanted to destroy my father or the company he'd built. "I've been offered a position with Reinhardt Development," Preston continued, "Dad's biggest competitor. They want me to head their new sustainable building division." I couldn't hide my surprise. "You sustainable building?" He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I've been researching it since. Well, since you took over the club. Turns out there's a lot of money in building green. More importantly, it's where the industry is headed. And you're telling me this because I'm going to take the job," Preston said, straightening his shoulders. "And I wanted you to hear it from me, not the rumor mill." I studied my brother, trying to discern his true motivations. "This will be seen as a betrayal, you know. Especially now." "I know." He looked tired suddenly. "But I need to make my own way. Dad's path is a dead end." As Preston stood to leave, he hesitated. "For what it's worth, I think what you've done here is impressive. I wouldn't have had the guts." It wasn't quite an apology or a declaration of support, but from Preston it was significant. Another crack in the facade of family unity that my parents had worked so hard to maintain. The final piece of my parents' counterattack came in the form of a rival club. My father, having failed to recapture Evergreen Hills, announced he was establishing a new, even more exclusive country club on property he owned on the other side of town. He personally invited every Evergreen Hills member, promising lower dues and traditional values without political agendas. It could have been devastating. Instead, it turned out to be his greatest miscalculation. Only a small fraction of members defected, mostly my parents' closest friends and business associates. The vast majority stayed, many explicitly expressing support for our vision. Even more embarrassing for my father, his new club struggled to attract additional members beyond his inner circle, despite expensive marketing campaigns and discounted rates. 6 months after the gala, the transformation of Evergreen Hills was well underway, and my vision for a more ethical, sustainable Lockhart legacy was taking shape. But the family wounds remained raw, and the personal cost of standing my ground had been significant. Despite the professional victories, I still woke some nights with a hollow feeling in my chest, mourning the family relationships that seemed irreparably damaged. The question that kept me awake wasn't whether I'd done the right thing, I knew I had, but whether reconciliation would ever be possible, or if some bridges once burned could never be rebuilt. Almost exactly 1 year after the night of the gala, I stood in the club's newly renovated ballroom surveying the preparations for our Green Future Gala, the reimagined version of the annual Lockhart event. Gone were the ostentatious ice sculptures and imported exotic flowers, replaced by living plant installations from local greenhouses and sustainable decor created by community artists. "It looks beautiful," Grandpa Walter said, joining me. At 86, he moved a bit slower now but remained sharp as ever, different but beautiful. "Do you think people will miss the old extravagance?" I asked. He considered this, then shook his head. "They might notice the difference, but they won't miss it. Real elegance has nothing to do with excess." The past year had been a whirlwind of changes, challenges, and unexpected successes. Evergreen Hills had become a case study in sustainable luxury, featured in business and environmental publications alike. Our membership had not only recovered from the initial defections, but had grown with a more diverse roster that better reflected the community. The family dynamics had evolved in ways I couldn't have predicted. Preston was thriving at Reinhardt Development, having found his niche in sustainable building after years of trying to be a carbon copy of our father. Whitney and Damien had established their arts foundation, which now partnered with Evergreen Hills for community programs. Both my siblings maintained cautious relationships with our parents while forging their own paths, not outright rebellion but a quiet assertion of independence. My parents remained the hardest nut to crack. My father's rival club had faltered and eventually closed within 8 months, a very public failure that had wounded his pride deeply. My mother had gradually withdrawn from her social leadership roles, claiming to be focusing on family but really retreating from the changing social landscape where her husband's influence no longer guaranteed deference. They had not spoken to me directly since the night of the gala. All communication had been through attorneys, or occasionally through Whitney when absolutely necessary. I had made several overtures, invitations to see the changes at the club, offers to discuss potential collaboration on charitable initiatives, all rebuffed with icy silence. Until yesterday, when my mother had unexpectedly called. "Your father is in the hospital," she had said, her voice tight. "Heart attack. Not severe but a warning sign. The doctors say he needs to reduce stress." My stomach had dropped. Despite everything, he was still my father. "Is he going to be okay?" "Yes," she'd answered. "But it's been a difficult year." The understatement of the century. "Would he want to see me?" I'd asked carefully. A long pause. "I don't know, Savannah, but I think he should." Now, as Grandpa Walter and I finalized details for the gala, I was preparing to visit my father in the hospital afterward. The prospect filled me with equal parts hope and dread. "Do you think there's any chance for reconciliation?" I asked Grandpa. He patted my hand. "The question isn't whether it's possible, but whether it's healthy. Reconciliation without accountability isn't healing, it's enabling." "I don't need him to grovel," I said. "I just want some acknowledgement that what he did, cutting me off, trying to destroy my reputation, was wrong. And if he can't give you that," I considered the question seriously, "then at least I'll have tried. I can move forward knowing I extended the olive branch." The gala itself was a triumph. Over 300 guests attended, including state environmental officials, sustainable business leaders, and yes, the traditional Connecticut elite, who had once looked down on my radical ideas. They mingled with the local environmental activists, community organizers, and arts leaders who would never have received invitations under the old regime. My speech focused not on the past year's conflicts but on the coming year's possibilities. The Lockhart Foundation, now under my direction with Grandpa Walter's blessing, announced major new initiatives in sustainable development, environmental education, and community renewal. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic, a far cry from the polite golf claps that had greeted my father's self-congratulatory speeches in years past. As the event wound down, Whitney approached me, champagne in hand. "Not bad, sis, not bad at all. High praise coming from you," I teased. "Mother called," she said, lowering her voice. "She's at the hospital. Father's asking for you." My heart skipped. "He asked for me specifically," Whitney nodded. "First time he said your name in a year, according to her. You should go now. Damien and I can handle things here." I found myself standing outside my father's private hospital room 30 minutes later, gathering courage. Through the door's window, I could see him, diminished somehow, lying against white pillows, my mother sitting rigidly in a chair beside him. I knocked softly and entered. My mother looked up, her face a mask of composure despite the strain evident in her eyes. "Savannah," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I'll give you two some privacy." As she passed me, she paused briefly. "He's been through a lot," she murmured, half explanation, half warning. Then I was alone with my father for the first time since that night at the club. You came, he said, his voice raspier than I remembered. Of course I came. You're my father. He studied me, his eyes moving over my face as if searching for something. The club is doing well, I hear. Not exactly the opening I'd expected. Yes, it is. Membership is up 22% this year. A slight nod. Preston says the sustainable initiatives have become a model for other clubs. They have, I confirmed. We've had consultations with clubs across the country. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I moved closer to his bed. How are you feeling? Like I've had a heart attack, he replied dryly, a glimpse of his old sardonic humor. Then more seriously, like I've been forced to stop and reconsider some things. I waited, not wanting to push. I was wrong, he said, finally, the words clearly difficult for him. Not about everything, but about how I handled your independence. Coming from my father, this was the equivalent of falling to his knees, begging forgiveness. I never wanted to hurt you, I said carefully. I just couldn't compromise on what I believed was right. You're like your grandfather, he said, and for once it didn't sound like a criticism. Stubborn as hell, but usually right. Usually I raised an eyebrow and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Don't push it, he warned, but without real heat. We talked for another hour, not resolving every issue or healing every wound, but beginning a process that might eventually lead there. He acknowledged that his tactics against me had been excessive. I admitted that some of my initial changes at the club could have been implemented more gradually, with more consideration for tradition. Before I left, he said something that stayed with me. Your grandmother, my mother, used to say that the true measure of the Lockhart name wasn't in what we accumulated, but in what we built to last. I think I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. It's not too late to reclaim it, I told him. His expression was guarded but thoughtful. Perhaps not. 2 weeks later, my father was released from the hospital. To everyone's surprise, he and my mother accepted an invitation to tour the renovated club facilities. The visit was awkward but civil, with my father asking unexpectedly insightful questions about the sustainable systems we'd implemented. At the end of the tour, standing on the terrace overlooking the golf course, he made an unexpected proposal. The Reinhardt Project Preston is working on the sustainable housing development. It needs financing. I waited, unsure where he was going with this. Lockhart Developments has the capital and the land. We could partner with Reinhardt. Bring Preston's project under our umbrella. The implications were significant. Not just a business proposition, but a family one, a way to bring Preston back into the fold, while embracing the sustainable direction both my brother and I had championed. That would be a major shift in company direction, I said carefully. Yes, he agreed. It would be. Over the following months, the partnership took shape. My father didn't undergo a complete personality transformation. He remained demanding, sometimes difficult, occasionally stubborn about unnecessary details. But he was making an effort, and that meant something. My mother took longer to thaw her social pride, having suffered the deeper wound. But even she eventually found a role for herself in the family's new direction, applying her considerable social skills to building relationships with sustainable business leaders and environmental philanthropists. On the anniversary of Grandpa Walter's birth, we gathered at his estate for a family dinner, the first time all of us had been together in the same room, without lawyers or public witnesses, in nearly 2 years. The conversation was sometimes strained, occasionally lapsed into old patterns, but we managed to navigate the evening without major conflict. After dinner, Grandpa pulled me aside onto the porch swing where we'd sat that day when he first revealed his plan for the club. Did you ever imagine we'd be here? I asked him, looking through the window at my family, imperfect, complicated, but somehow finding a new equilibrium. I hoped, he said simply, but I wasn't certain. Your father is stubborn, but he's not stupid. Eventually he was bound to recognize that adapting was better than extinction. Is that what this is? Adaptation rather than genuine change. Grandpa considered this. Perhaps it started that way. But real change often begins with practical necessity before it becomes true conviction. He wasn't wrong. My father hadn't suddenly become an environmental crusader, but he had recognized that the future belonged to those who embraced sustainability rather than resisted it. His partnership with Reinhardt was driven partly by business acumen, partly by family politics, but the results were real regardless of the motivation. And perhaps that was the most important lesson from this entire journey. People rarely change completely, and families carry their patterns through generations. But small shifts, consistent pressure, and unwavering commitment to what's right can eventually bend the arc of even the most entrenched systems. The Lockhart legacy would never be perfect. My relationship with my parents would always carry the scars of our conflict. But we had found a way forward that honored both the past and the future, that balanced family loyalty with broader responsibilities. As Grandpa and I sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues over the property our family had stewarded for generations, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. Not because everything was resolved or because all wounds were healed, but because I had stayed true to my principles while still leaving room for reconciliation. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a thunderclap moment of vindication, but in the slower, quieter recalibration of relationships and power. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destruction, but transformation, helping others become better versions of themselves even when they resist the process. And sometimes, family is worth fighting for, not by surrendering your values to keep the peace, but by standing firm until others begin to see what you've seen all along. If this story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family conflicts and reconciliation in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? How did it turn out for you? Don't forget to like this video if you found value in it. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories with unexpected twists. Share with someone who might be struggling with their own family drama. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me, and remember, sometimes the people who push us away are the ones who need us to stay strong the most.